couple of my friends here now, they'll send, they'll find these ridiculous pictures of a huntsman, which is a really big spider, kind of like a tarantula. And like, I'll just get random text with a picture of a spider and I drop my phone. I'm like, oh, why did you do that? But I've yet to see any of those. And
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you knew one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now, on to my next guest, Nicholas Williams. Hi, Nick.
how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing as well as I think is possible and to be assumed considering the pandemic that we're all living through right now.
Mm-hmm. You, I think, might by a couple hundred miles be the farthest away guest that I've interviewed on the show.
Well, I assumed that would be the case, yeah.
So do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself to my listeners so they understand what I mean by that?
Sure. So my name is Nicholas Williams, and I'm the conductor of the Wind Symphony. Associate Professor of Music is my official title at the Melbourne Conservatorium in Melbourne, Australia. And I moved here from Texas a little over a year ago. So I moved to Melbourne in 2019, in July of 2019. From Texas. So before I moved to Australia, I was the assistant director of wind studies at the University of North Texas. So I think it's about a 9,000 mile point to point trip from Dallas Fort Worth to Melbourne, as it is pronounced here. So yeah, I assumed I might be one of the furthest people that you've interviewed, or maybe the furthest person from where you are. Yeah.
Well, I was looking at the map, and I did interview Jody Blackshaw, but I think she is slightly northeast of you.
She is.
Which means that you're the farthest.
I win. Yay.
Sorry, Jody, if you're listening. Yeah. So, let's talk about your origin story, but then we absolutely have to talk about how a Texan ends up in Australia. But let's start with your origin story. How'd you get started in music as a kid?
I grew up with parents who were musical to varying degrees. My father thought he could sing, so there was that. My mother was a pianist and a teacher, not of music, but she played piano. And we grew up in the church, so I sang in the church choir. And then when it was time to join band or orchestra or choir in sixth grade, I decided to do band. And I started on clarinet, which most people don't know because I am a trumpet player, or as I make jokes about now, I'm a trumpet owner since I don't play very often anymore. So I own many trumpets that I don't play. But I started on clarinet, and I played the clarinet for 4 days. And my mother told me that I had to pick something that was a little bit less squeaky, which, now I understand. But at the time I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's not going to work. And so most of my friends played trumpet. And so I just decided, all right, well, if this clarinet thing isn't going to work, I guess I'll sit with my trumpet friends. So I did that. I grew up in Dallas, started band, like I said, in sixth grade, and played all the way through high school. I went to Skyline High School. And after I graduated there, I did band in high school, obviously marching band, and was drum major. Then I went to North Texas, to the University of North Texas, as a music education student. Did the 5-year plan, which is pretty common at that institution. So did 5 years of music ed and trumpet playing and all the things that go along with that. Student taught in the Dallas area, like Colony High School and Griffin Middle School. And then I started teaching in Plano, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. So that was the beginning of my musical career.
Yeah. So growing up in Texas, you mentioned, and this seems to be a theme, the church playing a big role in your early music education. Can you just touch on that a little bit more?
Sure. Like I said, growing up in the church, I sang in the church choir when I was a little kid, and my mother sang in the church choir. And after I joined band, I joined the church orchestra, which was the first orchestral experience that I had, and it was pretty decent. I remember being in it thinking, this is pretty good. And as an adult, I went to college, like I said, at North Texas. And then when I would come back every now and then, I'd hear the church orchestra. And as a college music student, your ears are more opened and well tuned. And I realized that church orchestra was really pretty good. So yeah, that the whole music thing has been around me my whole life, with my mom playing piano and being a singer and constantly hearing music, church music growing up, either in the rehearsals, when you're a little kid, and mom takes you to I think it was Thursday night choir rehearsals. So you hear the rehearsals on Thursdays, and then you hear the services on Sunday. And actually, I forgot to mention, but let's see, grades 3 through 5, I sang in the school choir, which was a totally extracurricular thing outside of the music class. We would do rehearsals after school, and so yeah, I started out as a singer, and then a clarinet player for a few days, and then moved to trumpet.
That's really interesting that your mother chose to switch you to trumpet. That wouldn't be the sort of the first instinct for people who wanted less noise.
Well, she didn't really tell me what to play. She just told me what not to play.
So percussion was on the list of not playing?
Well, I don't think that was ever really an option for me, which is interesting because most of my friends now, not most, but a large number of them are percussionists. But that just wasn't something that interested me when I was a younger kid.
So tell me about going to North Texas. And what I really want to know is when in high school did you know that you were going to go be a music major and perhaps pursue a career in music?
Well, that's a really good question. So I felt like music was always an important part of my life, as I mentioned, with the church music thing and being in band all the years that I was in band. I guess it was my junior year in high school. I was, trying to figure out what does one do with one's life when you're in 11th grade, so you're 16 years old. So I wasn't sure. I did. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, so there was that, and I did. Like the mock trial team. I thought I might want to be. If I wasn't going to be a teacher, I might be an attorney. And something happened my senior year, and I can't really pinpoint a specific, day or event or concert or football game or anything that was like the aha moment. But at some point, of all the options I had for career path, they just sort of disappeared. And there was really only one that was interesting to me, which was to be a music teacher. So I do remember talking to my band director at Skyline High School, and I asked him, which schools should I consider going to for music ed, and he gave me a list of 3 or 4 that I might consider, and but I remember him saying, you should consider this school and this school and this school. But I think you would fit in at North Texas. That really seems to be a good place for how you interact with people. And the high school I went to, Skyline, was a large program, a large high school of 4,000 students, and I fit in really well with that large environment. And so he felt that North Texas might be a good place for me just because of the atmosphere and the teaching and the teachers, the ensembles, and obviously the reputation of the school. So I just said, okay, North Texas it is. And I didn't do a campus visit until it was time to do the audition. Did the application process and went and did my trumpet audition. Still didn't do a campus tour. So I was on campus, I don't know, an hour or so, played my audition, met with the brass teachers, and then I went home. It's like, okay, I think that went pretty well. So I guess I'm going to go to North Texas. And, it really wasn't until I did freshman orientation that I actually saw any part of the campus other than the music building. And which, now thinking back, it's like, wow, that wasn't the best way to decide a school. But, my most important music teacher at the time said, this is where you should go. And I said, okay. And I, did the audition and they accepted me. So there it was. Yeah.
This is why recruiting at the college level around the country, we know that the band directors are the most important people because they steer the kids to schools most often.
Absolutely. And I remember being a high school band director. I did that for 5 years, and it was the same with a lot of my students, knowing them and their personalities and their strengths and weaknesses and the areas that they need to improve on, the ways that they can immediately, shine and be great contributing members to the ensembles and the environments. I definitely pointed certain students at various schools, and they all weren't North Texas, and they all weren't in Texas. Just sort of depended on a lot of things. But over the years, when your network of colleagues grows, you kind of start to figure out which programs do what and what their strengths are, and how the individual teachers, the instrumental teachers, how they work and function and all of that. And so, yeah, you're right. The band directors are doing some great recruiting for each other.
Yeah. No doubt. So you mentioned your high school gig. So can you tell us about that? What was that? What was your experience there?
Yeah. So I taught at Clark High School in Plano. Plano ISD has a pretty almost unique high school system in that there are high schools, which are 9th and 10th grade centers, and then senior highs, which are 11th and 12th grade schools. So Clark was a 9-10 school that fed into Plano East, which is a Plano East Senior High, which is an 11th and 12th grade campus. And we were considered 5A schools just because of population size. And honestly, I don't remember the exact population for Clark, student population, but it was somewhere around 2,000, I think. I mean, it was a large school. And then Plano Senior High, or Plano East and Plano Senior High, actually, would typically have the largest graduating classes every year in the state of Texas. This was before Allen High School became the gigantic program and school that it is now. But so, yeah, large schools. The Clark High School band program at the time had somewhere around 200 students in it. So we had 3 concert ensembles, some years 4, just depending on how we split things up. Choir, we had a choral program, we had an orchestral program. The band area had a marching band with 9th and 10th graders. So imagine that. So it was an interesting situation in that it was a full band program, and the students were great. The parents were great. Plano at the time, and they might still now, had a really strong general music program, getting the kids through grade 5. So those 5th grade students could do some really amazing things. And then I don't know what their curriculum is now. It's been a long time since I've looked, but at that point, in Plano ISD, when you were in the 6th grade, you had to do part of the curriculum was music. So every student in Plano ISD did music through the 6th grade. So through the 5th grade, it was general classroom music, and then in the 6th grade, you chose band, choir, or orchestra. And then after 6th grade, then you had fine arts requirements, so theater and visual art became options in addition to music. But every kid in 6th grade in that school district played an instrument or sang in choir. So we had some pretty strong and enthusiastic young musicians just because of the training that they had starting in elementary school.
There's 2 questions that come out of that for me. What was that like to go to UIL with just younger bands? How do you compete in that kind of setting in Texas? And then also, what was it like teaching marching band without those older leaders?
Those are amazingly great questions. So the way the 9-10s fit into UIL structure, so Plano East, for example, Plano East Senior High, the 11th and 12th grade school, had 2 9 and 10 grade campuses that fed into it. So Clark High School and Williams High School. And so the band program at the 9-10s were considered non-varsity because the varsity level was at the senior high. So for marching band, there was a separate competition in the UIL structure for non-varsity marching bands. And for the most part, it was just Plano schools and the occasional brand new campus. If a new school opens, typically it's not a 4-year school. It might be, 9 through 11 or 9 and 10, and you add grades on as the school adds years in existence. So it was mostly, before the varsity started marching competitions, it would be I think it was five or six Plano high school campuses. So non-varsity marching contest. And then, the 4A schools and the 5A schools would do their thing. So that's how that was set up as far as marching band goes. And for the concert portion of UIL, concert and sight reading, it was the same. So the top band at Clark, the honors band, was considered a 5A non-varsity group. And then the second band at Clark was 5A sub non-varsity, I think it's called now, sub non-varsity A, and then the third band was sub non-varsity B. So in essence, it was, in our cluster, the top band, the wind ensemble at Plano East was the varsity group. And then interestingly enough, so at Plano East, there are multiple groups. So Plano East would also have the second band, the symphonic band, which would be non-varsity. But the top band at Clark would be non-varsity, and the top ensemble at Williams, the other school, would be non-varsity. So in the Plano East umbrella, if you will, there's a varsity ensemble and then 3 non-varsities and 3 sub non-varsity, blah, blah, blah. And it sort of trickles down until, there are no more ensembles that are participating in concert and sight reading. Going back to the marching part of it, you asked about, not having those older students to be leaders and, in many ways, musical leaders and maturity leaders and personality leaders. That was probably the biggest challenge that I faced as a band director at a 9-10 school. And I imagine my colleagues at the other 9th and 10th grade high schools felt the same way. You didn't have those 11th and 12th graders to lead the way and to show everyone how to do things. And that was both good and bad. With the 9th and 10th grade school, we had them in this little bubble and an age range that, they're pretty vulnerable in a lot of ways. So maybe on the possibly negative side, we didn't have the older students to show them how to do things. But on the positive side, we didn't have those 11th and 12th graders to show them how to do anything, So it was both, I guess, a blessing and a curse. And I remember every year at the beginning of marching season, you have an ensemble, which was our percentage was always like 55% ninth graders and 45% 10th graders, with attrition. So you have an ensemble that is mostly beginners, a marching ensemble that's mostly beginners. And the ones with the experience, the 10th graders, they only have one season. And at the 9th and 10th grade level in Plano, we only attended home football games. So we didn't travel at all. So the kids with the most experience had one season with half as many performances as most high schools because we didn't do away games. And, so we would have our most experienced leaders would have 4 or 5 high school football games in their pocket, if you will, 1 or 2 marching contests, and that's it, so it was interesting, but it was a lot of fun. You get to start over pretty much every year. So, one year, if certain aspects of your teaching maybe didn't go as well as you wanted to, or the students just didn't pick up on the concept, you just start over the next year.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so then from there, you went back to graduate school, back to North Texas?
Yeah, I'm one of the few people who have all their degrees from the same place, which isn't typically recommended. And it wasn't the original plan. It's just, it's how life worked for me. But so I taught high school for 5 years, and then I went back to North Texas as a grad student working on my master's degree. And in the first semester of being a master's student, the job opportunity came up for the following year that I ended up taking. So I started a master's degree, and long story short, ended up getting the assistant band director job, basically the assistant director of wind studies position at North Texas, starting in what would have been my second year as a master's student. And then over time, I finished my master's degree very quickly. And then I stuck around for my doctorate while I was on faculty at North Texas. And I was on faculty there for 16 years before I moved here. So one little side note, when I started teaching high school, I taught with Fred Vellis, who is still teaching. So Fred taught at Clark High School for many years. And then he got a position. He was hired at TCU to be their associate director. So Fred left Clark, went to TCU. I then spent the next 4 years teaching at Clark. So in my 5 years, I was an assistant director at Clark for 2 years, and then 3 years as the director of bands. Then I went back to North Texas. Well, when I go back to North Texas, Fred Vellis is the assistant director of wind studies. He went from TCU to North Texas. So my first year teaching, I taught with Fred Vellis. My first year of grad school, I worked with Fred Vellis, and of course Eugene Corporon and Dennis Fisher. But so Fred and I have this interesting little work relationship where we work together for a year, and the joke amongst a lot of our friends is that I run him off. So we work together for a year, and he leaves. And then I go to North Texas where we worked together for a year. And then he got a really cool job at the time, Texas A&M Kingsville as director of bands. So he left North Texas to go do that. And then I replaced him at North Texas.
How do you end up in Australia?
Like I said, I spent 16 years at North Texas as the assistant director, as a conductor of the concert band, which then morphed into the wind ensemble when we did a restructuring of the wind studies area. I was the director of the marching band. I conducted the brass ensemble for a while for the brass band, which is a British style brass band that Brian Bowman started when he was teaching at North Texas. So I did a lot of things, athletic band stuff. I taught conducting classes and did some sabbatical replacements. And I felt like, it was time for me to try something new. Because as I said, I grew up in Dallas, went to a Dallas school, all of the schools, elementary, middle, high school. Then I went to the University of North Texas, which is in the Dallas area. I left there and I taught public school in a suburb of Dallas, went back to Denton, which is a suburb of Dallas. So I spent pretty much my whole life in a bubble of about a 40-mile radius from our first home in Texas. So I started looking at, just a couple of jobs here and there that I thought were interesting around the U.S. Just as North Texas really is a great place to be. So why would I leave there? I'd only leave North Texas for, a really great opportunity. And this position came up at the University of Melbourne, and I started looked at it. I remember I saw the posting and I read it. I was like, that's neat. And I deleted it, because it's in Australia and that's a long way away from Texas. But then you mentioned Jody Blackshaw a little while ago, and we recorded a couple of Jody's pieces. And the first time we did that, she flew from here to Texas to be a part of that recording session. So I met her and her husband, David, and we had a great time, just a really good first meeting and all of that. And also, as you probably know, and your listeners, Mark, that John Lynch is the director of bands at the Sydney Conservatory. And before John moved to Sydney, he was at the University of Georgia, and he spent some time at Kansas and Northwestern, I believe. But so the job at the Melbourne Conservatorium gets posted, and I see it, and I sort of like, yeah, that's really cool, but that's a long way from here. And I just kept thinking about it, like it kept coming back to my mind. There's a Facebook group of instrumental conducting jobs, I think is the name of the Facebook group. And so then this Melbourne job was posted there, and I saw it again, and I can't remember, 3 or 4 people from around the world sent me the job posting and said, hey, you might consider this if you'd ever consider leaving North Texas, which, to be honest, I imagine most of my friends and colleagues thought I would never do. And I was actually on that list of people who thought I'd never leave there. And then I think I emailed or texted John Lynch or called him or something, but we somehow, made contact. Or maybe it was at Midwest. I don't know. I'd have to think about the timing of all of it. But we started talking about his experience in Sydney and what it was like to move to Australia and to work with Australian musicians and teachers and composers and all of that. And he, it was just a really positive experience for him. It still is, as far as I know. And then I heard the first recording of the Sydney Conservatorium wind ensemble or wind symphony with John, and it was really good. So now this job here in Melbourne was a part of the background of my thought process, and it slowly moved to the front. And so I just decided, okay, fine, I'll apply and we'll see what happens. But I really wasn't expecting much. Even though they were doing an international search, I just assumed they were probably going to pick an Australian, sort of makes sense to me. There's already one American person conducting wind band in Australia. And so they probably don't want two. But I did the application, and then that year, which would have been 2018, there was an ensemble. There's a wind group from Melbourne, the Blackburn High School. They were performing at Midwest Clinic. So I went and heard them, and I thought, that's a really, really good high school band. I mean, obviously if you're playing at Midwest, you're among the elite performers, and that ensemble was one of them, and so I listened to that concert strategically because I know, I'd already applied for the job, and it just so happens that Blackburn was playing at Midwest. So I heard them. And then their jazz band played also as a part of their US tour. So I heard that group, and it just seemed like, okay, well, I've applied. I've heard great things about the Australian musicians and what's happening at this level. John Lynch seems to be really happy with his position at the Sydney Con, and well, we'll just see what happens. So yeah, I just waited and didn't think I would really hear anything, and I did. It was a little surprising. I got an email from the director of the con, and it said, we'd like to talk to you. So can we do a Skype interview? I was like, sure, that sounds fun. I'm still thinking, in the back of my mind, they're going to hire an Australian, and so, but I'll make new friends, and who knows? It never hurts to meet new people. So I do the Skype interview, and I felt really comfortable, because of the time difference. It was about 9:00 for me in Texas. So, and this was in March, I think, or February. I can't remember. So I do the interview, and it's on Skype. So I've got my jacket, shirt, and tie, and shorts and flip-flops because I went to my office at North Texas. So I don't get in trouble for that, but I did the interview there because the internet was more stable than it was at my house. So I do the interview, and I felt really good about it. Everyone on the committee they seemed nice and intelligent and approachable and just really fantastic. And I was not nervous. And so we finished the interview, and the director, Gary, he says, okay, well, you're the first person that we've interviewed. So you're probably not going to hear from us for a couple of weeks while we finish the rest of our Skype interviews. And I was like, that's fine. I totally get it. So I drive home, just at that time, like a 15-minute drive from my office to my house. And by the time I got home, there was another email from Gary saying, the committee loved you. We'd like to bring you to campus to do a 10-day campus interview experience thing, blah, blah, blah. And so that sort of freaked me out. Mostly because I didn't tell anyone that I had applied for this job, because it's in Australia. They're not going to hire an American. So I don't want to freak anyone out for no reason. So I literally didn't tell anyone at North Texas that I had applied for this, for this position. So the next morning, I go to school, and Dennis Fisher and Eugene Corporon are sitting in Dennis's office. So I walk in, I close the door, and I sit on Dennis's couch, and they finish whatever they're talking about. I'm like, okay, so has anyone called to check references? And they both looked at me, and now it's super awkward. And Eugene said, no. And I said, well, I had a Skype interview last night with the Melbourne Conservatorium, and they both just sort of looked at me funny. It's like the one in Australia, so it's super awkward silence, and kind of like this. I mean, like nothing. So then I continue to talk, and Gene goes, wait, say that again? It's like, yeah, I applied for the Melbourne Conservatorium Wind Symphony conducting job, and I had a Skype interview last night, and they want me to come to Australia to do a campus visit. And then there was another awkward silence, and then they were like, well, congratulations, we think. And so then after that, we started talking about the school, and, we looked at the website together, and, from that point on, Dennis and Jean were super supportive of what I was considering. And, it's an interesting thing, they were supportive in that this was something that I wanted. So they wanted to support me that way, but they obviously didn't want me to leave. So it's one of those things like good luck, but not a whole lot of good luck. And yeah, uh, so I flew to Australia, which it takes forever to get here from Texas. Um, there's a flight from LA to Melbourne, which is about 15 hours. And that was the longest flight I'd ever been on. So yeah, it takes about a day from the point when I would leave my house in Texas, get to DFW, fly to LA, layover, blah, 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 fly from LA to here or to Sydney and then take another flight. But I was here for 10 days and I loved it. I met just a lot of really great teachers and students. And there are a couple of Americans who are teachers in the conservatorium here. So it was a really good fit. I felt really comfortable with how things went and with what I felt like the strengths were here and the areas that could be strengthened and maybe altered a little bit. And it was a very interesting thing, when I decided, okay, I'm going to do it. And, when you take a job in the US and you move from state to state, that's a big deal. But to move to the other side of the planet in a different hemisphere and, it really wasn't until about a week before I moved that it all hit me, so I got rid of a lot of stuff, decluttered, and I put some things into storage and I got rid of all my furniture. And I was like, I'm just going to start all the way over. Like it's way easier to move here with almost nothing than to get one of those shipping containers where they put all of your furniture in it and it gets, they put it on a boat and it takes a month to get it. And, half your stuff is broken. So I was like, it's just furniture. So I'll just start over. So I literally moved here with my laptop. I brought 50 scores, my 2 dogs, and 5 suitcases of clothes, and started over. Yeah.
All right, Nick. So tell me about the program at the Melbourne Conservatorium. What is your band when you're actually playing and not in pandemic? What does your band look like? How is the program structured compared to an American university or American music ed program?
There are a lot of similarities between, what we would see in the U.S. And there's some differences, obviously, but here in the conservatorium, we have 2 wind bands. So there's a wind symphony and a concert band, and there are also 2 orchestras, 2 full orchestras. So the wind symphony has about 50 musicians in it, and the concert band is a little bit larger, 60, 65. So when you look at the ensembles, it looks like what you would expect from an American model. We do a part rotation, as a lot of collegiate ensembles do. So every piece, the ensemble looks a little bit differently based on, what the composer wrote and how I roster people in and out so that not everyone plays on everything. So that part looks like, what you would see in the US. And conservatory wide, the students, the music students take theory and oral training and music history and all the things that you would expect from a music school at this level. So that part is the same. What's different here is that every state and territory in Australia focuses on music a little bit differently. So some states focus more energy on music education at the elementary school level, primary school, and then after that, it's completely extracurricular. And some states, it's a little bit the opposite. So here in Victoria, there is music training throughout, the students' time from primary school all the way up. but most of the classroom music focus here is at the high school level. So the student training is a little bit different. And in most of the states, actually probably all of them, the ensemble experience is completely extracurricular for the most part. So I'll say 95%-ish. The ensemble experience is outside of the school day. And so what you have during the school day is general music, whether it's primary school or at the high school level. But all the ensemble experiences are outside of the school. So a lot of the students here, when they get to the conservatory or to whatever, university they decide to go to, a lot of them will come from places where if they played in band or jazz band or orchestra, it's once a week before or after school. And, there might be a sectional or a student-led something or other, but for the most part, everyone together, sit down, let's do band, or sit down, do orchestra or big band. It's pretty much once a week, which I didn't exactly know when I moved here that was the case. So, when I found out, I remember one of the first things I thought was, oh, so wait a minute, this group that played at Midwest, Blackburn High, they have one rehearsal a week. And I mean, they sound phenomenal. And there are several schools in Victoria and in New South Wales, the state where Sydney is, that are just outstanding. I mean, if you play a recording, they sound like some of the best high school ensembles that you'd hear in the US. So I found out, okay, Blackburn, the top group at Blackburn, they usually do 2 rehearsals a week, which, okay, it's still twice a week compared to what we're used to with the American model, where if you're on a regular school day schedule, you see your students every day. It's just a little bit different here. So I remember one of the interview parts, one of the interview sessions here was a student lunch. So the conservatory set up this lunch for me and some of the staff and some of the students. And there's a saxophonist, Nicholas, who was telling me about his high school music experience. And he said something that just caught my ear, and I'll never forget it. He's a first-year university student, and he said, "Yeah, this is my first year ever playing in a band." And I was like, "What do you mean?" We didn't have a concert band at my school. I'm like, "Oh, so you just play in jazz band?" He's like, "No, we didn't have one of those either." So how does a saxophonist, or as the Australians pronounce it, how does a saxophonist get to university level music major and you've never played in a large ensemble playing your primary instrument? Well, the town that he grew up in just didn't have that. So he did classroom music. He was fortunate enough that there were some good saxophone teachers in that city. So he had private lessons and did recitals, and he learned how to be a great saxophonist. But he had never played in a concert band until he got to the university. I mean, that's mind blowing, right? Like, how does that happen? But it happens.
Have you had a chance to go out into any schools and see what it looks like before the pandemic?
I did. When I got here, the band community really fully embraced me. I had emails of just constant emails from teachers and conductors and just people saying, "Hey, welcome to Melbourne. Here's my email address. Let's meet up. I'd love to talk to you about blah, blah, blah." Or there's a concert on this date. If you're interested, we can meet up. And then after the concert, we can go have beverages with the other teachers in the area. So I had that opportunity to meet people from the very beginning, which was awesome. To instantly join this band family in Australia.
Can you maybe comment on a couple things that maybe we'd see different as far as, I don't know if it's from the organization to the way the classes are run or the bands are run? Do you have anything you can share that might be interesting to American teachers?
Well, like I said, the most of the ensembles here are well, almost all of the ensembles are extracurricular. So before school or after school, and just once a week. So what really caught my attention was the amount of efficiency that has to happen, for you to be successful, having only one rehearsal a week. And the other part that was really great was that the student involvement and participation has to be at a different level, because once again, you only meet together one day a week. So the students are expected to learn music on their own faster than what we might see in the U.S. Now, granted, most of the programs here, the students are also taking private lessons. So it isn't like a free for all and you only see a music teacher once a week. Especially in the state where I am, a lot of the top musicians, the top kids, are also in classroom music. So they are taking music every day, and they do have private lessons. They're surrounded by, music teachers every day. It's just the ensemble component is different. So one of the great things about the VCE, or the Victorian 12th grade music curriculum, is that these students have to do recitals, and a lot of what they're studying in classroom music at the 12th grade level in the state where I am, it's pretty similar to what our university students would do in their first year in music theory and oral training, with a little bit of music history as well. So the students get to the conservatory, so the top level kids, they come here and they have a really pretty good theoretical background. They've had oral training. Their musicology, ethnomusicology experience is more than what we might see in the U.S. They've had private lessons their whole time. They've already done recitals. They come in with just a different level of kind of a well-rounded music education that's a little bit different than what we would see in the U.S. And in many cases, quite a bit different than what we would see in Texas. From a standpoint of a well-rounded music education. The downside is, as I said, they've had ensemble rehearsals once a week. So a lot of these players come in, these students, and they are fantastic soloists and instrumentalists and, individual musicians who don't have as strong of a skill set of ensemble skills as what students in the U.S. and especially in Texas would have. So there's pros and cons to the system here for sure.
Remember your first term of teaching? Learning all the skills that you don't get taught in music school, managing a transitioning culture in your classroom, finding out that you have to teach guitar this term? During those early years, we found out that leaning on a community of music educators was important, not only for building that knowledge in ourselves, but also maintaining enough sanity to serve the students right in front of us. Amused is a podcast centered around a community of music teachers. Between the four of us, we teach choir, band, orchestra, general, jazz, and marching band at the elementary through collegiate levels. We certainly don't have all the answers, but you're welcome to listen in while we try to find them. Join us while we work through the challenges of music teaching and celebrate the joy of bringing music making into the lives of young people. In each episode, you'll hear stories, both good and bad, about that week of teaching, and we'll try and tackle an issue that one of us is struggling with. Something we're all taught is that music brings people together, but being the only teacher in your subject at a site can be really isolating. We think everyone ought to be a part of a community, and you're welcome to come join ours. Episodes come out on Wednesdays during the school year, and you can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at amusedcast.org.
All right, Nick. So I ask a set of questions to every guest on the show. And the first of these questions is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I think the interesting point of your question is healthy and unhealthy. I believe that there are some really positive outcomes with competition, especially with younger students. For some students, it's a really good motivator, and for some people, they really feed off of that stimulus. And I think where it could become unhealthy is when it becomes the driving force. And so now I think we're talking about the teacher, because the students, they're gonna react and respond in ways appropriate to how we as educators respond and the way we present things to the students. And obviously, before I moved here, being in the Dallas area and being in Texas, we have some really amazingly strong music programs and competition, whether it's through UIL or BOA or other circuits, local or kind of regional. There's a lot of opportunities to perform in these competitions, and some of the best bands that we have in the U.S. are also some of the most competitive bands that we have in the U.S. Competitive in the fact that they perform well, not necessarily competitive in that they go to try to win and try to beat other schools and all of that sort of thing. So I think when it becomes unhealthy is when the competitive attitude is out of balance. There are schools all around the U.S. that do a lot of competitions, but for those programs, those are just other performances and opportunities for those students to perform. And the winning and the medals and all of that kind of stuff, those are not the driving factors to the program. As a matter of fact, one of the programs in the Dallas area, I probably shouldn't say the name of the school, but if I were to say that, your listeners, many or most of them would recognize the name of this program. They go to things and they win a lot. They get all the trophies, and there's not a single trophy in that band hall. I mean, those trophies go to a storage room. Some of them go to like the trophy display case in the school lobby, with other things. But the winning and the medals and the plaques and the trophies and all that kind of stuff, it's not in the band hall. That's not what they do, or that's not why they do it. So it's, it's kind of extra stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, that teaches a little bit of humility, right?
Well, it does. And, this particular school, the kids, they go and they perform and they support their friends in the sister schools for that district. And I've noticed over time, some of these schools in the Dallas area have made some pretty strong band nerd friend connections with some of the schools in Austin and San Antonio. And so they literally at, BOA or if they go to Grand Nationals or the state marching contest, they will support each other. They'll go and hear the other bands perform, and then they go and do whatever else they need to do for their schedule for the rest of the day. But these competitions have created an opportunity for students to connect with students in other programs, to have this shared experience. We all know what it's like. If we're thinking about marching band in Texas, we all know what August is like. We all know how it's 1,000 degrees, and sometimes it's 1,000 degrees with 100% humidity. And then, there's the rain and all the things. We have those experiences, and we all know what it's like to have that great performance where, whether it's at a football game or a rehearsal or at a competition, where everything clicks and you finish and, you feel that energy and everyone's excited about what just happened. Those are common experiences that students can share. And if it weren't for some of the competitions, some of the opportunities to have those experiences wouldn't be possible. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I've had a lot of Texas folks on the last couple weeks. I don't know if you noticed.
I did. I saw, and I know many of them. So you had Dan Morrison and Mike Howard. Yeah. So those are some fantastic teachers. Dan Morrison and Mike Howard and I and several other teachers in mostly Texas, but in several other states too, we're all a part of this leadership company called Sassy. And so over the years, I've gotten a chance to see a lot of these fantastic teachers grow up in the profession. When we started Sassy, oh my goodness, in the early 2000s, a lot of these teachers were first or second year teachers or still in college. And so Mike Howard, both of those people, Mike and Dan, I remember when they were just baby teachers, and now, I look at what they're doing and hear their recordings, and it's amazing. I feel super proud. Not that I really had anything to do with their training, but just to be able to watch them grow as people and teachers and see what kinds of experiences they're providing for their students. It's fantastic.
All right, let's get on to the second question. And this question is pretty interesting because, as I often say, that, there's sort of like the joke of the band director. It's the first car in, last car out. And I think there's a sort of perverse pride taken in this. And
yep.
So how do you find a work-life balance in a career as a music educator?
Well, that is a great question, and I'm glad that you ask everyone. It would be interesting to hear all 150 various answers or 170 answers to that. I think we as a profession, we're starting to pay more attention to that now, as opposed to 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. And honestly, I don't know that I really would have ever thought about it before about 10 years ago. And I was one of those people, when I taught high school in the late 90s, early 2000s, I literally had the alarm code at the school, because often I would be the first person to get there. And so I would have to turn the alarm off, which, there were a couple of occasions I would forget. And, you can imagine what happens when the alarm goes off and all of that. But I think, so a part of that sort of weird pride about, like you said, being the first in and the last out, it really shows the commitment that a lot of teachers have to their ensemble and to their students and to the program itself. And so it's a weird thing in that, we give so much of our time, energy, lives to teaching and to these experiences that we can provide for the students. Sometimes it's at the detriment to ourselves. And now people are starting to pay attention to that work-life balance. And I think, in recent history, a lot of us have talked about it openly, and there have been clinics at TMEA and Midwest, and I'm sure other states around the U.S. about how can we be, teachers who are impactful to our students, but we do have this balance of life and work. And for me, it's been different based on various phases of my life. When I was a young teacher, I just didn't think about it, because I didn't think about it, and really no one was talking about it. And I think over time, especially maybe in Texas, where people are so busy with what we're doing because of either program size or expectation for events or whatnot. We've recently figured out that, for us, if we keep the saw sharpened, so to speak, we do a better job. And, I've been fortunate that, when I started teaching at North Texas, I was pretty young for a college teacher. And so that lifestyle as a college professor and the way the schedules are set up is different than a lot of public school teaching jobs. And I think for me, that's when when I started to realize how I felt like I was a better teacher, because I had more time to plan. I took more time to plan. I took more time to just make sure that I was rested. And then I would watch my friends and colleagues who were middle school, high school music teachers, and I just saw that grind, that schedule that they were doing, and over time it wears you down. And fortunately, I think now we're starting to figure out that this work-life balance is an important thing. And I imagine if you were to ask the same question a year from now, or maybe 2 or 3, once, we've moved past this pandemic, however long that's going to last, I think one of the things we're going to take away from this is we have to take care of ourselves better. And, it is really interesting to me now being here, because the work-life balance here is different. I mean, when I've talked to teachers here and would kind of tell them what a typical, high school band director in Texas, what that schedule is like, they look at me like, why would you do that? And sometimes I'm like, that's a good question. I don't know. Why would we do that? The work-life balance thing here is not just for teachers, but across the board. The Australians, I think, have figured out this work-life balance a lot better than a lot of people in the U.S. And I see it, when it's pretty clear, when you're more rested, you teach better and you can think better and you respond differently and better. And so fortunately, maybe because of questions like the one that you're asking, people are thinking about it, and we are learning how to take better care of ourselves as teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important. And it's something that certainly is putting, the pandemic has done a lot of things. But what it's done for teaching especially is it's sort of focused us on what's important. It's gotten us back to the basics of teaching. And I think it's going to be a little bit of a big bang in the way we teach music. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to come about, but I think there's something that's going to change here.
For sure. There are a lot of things that are going to change. I'm super curious just to get to the point where we can look back on this and talk about things like, hey, I remember when, so that we can look back and see what's different and what's better about whatever the new way or the new things are going to be, whether that's how much of our teaching can be done online or pre-recorded little snippets of videos, which I've started to do a lot here. I imagine a lot of the teachers and your listeners are people that, at 8:15 p.m. on a Sunday night, you have the greatest idea ever about something. And I've started just to go, I sit in front of my computer and I do like a 5-minute video of whatever it is that I'm thinking about. That's the greatest idea that I just had. And then, so I don't send that out, but I use it to play at the very end of one of the Zoom sessions with our students. Like, here's the thing I was thinking about last night, or it's 3 a.m. in the morning, and for whatever reason, I can't sleep because I'm thinking about the blah, blah, blah. And so here's that sort of stream of consciousness. So yeah, I do wonder what kinds of things we're going to keep after this pandemic.
All right. So we just sort of touched on this a little bit, but, and of course we are in the middle of a pandemic, so let's put that aside. But what are the challenges that are facing music education and band, and how can we best meet them? And if possible, if you know anything about Australia, if maybe you can touch on that as well.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is that we are constantly having to remind people, administrators, school board members, legislators, why what we do is important, not only for the students' education, but for our communities. And I think that's the same everywhere. A lot of music programs they can be expensive to run. And sometimes I think sometimes we aren't the best advocates for ourselves when we can't articulate why music is important. And for some schools, I think in a lot of ways it's probably easier to defend why music is important in Texas, because competition in general and athletics is really important in Texas. So, you can draw those parallels easier perhaps than in some other states. But, obviously what we do is not because of competition, or it shouldn't be, and it's not because of these contests, but it helps. So, getting back to what I was saying earlier about, being able to articulate either verbally or in print, why it's important for us to have the arts be a part of a student's education, a part of the community, a part of our experience as humans. That's a challenge, and I think as long as there's a cost to that, it's going to be a challenge that we have to face. One of the positives, though, is I think because of the internet and our instant access to information and to each other, it's a lot easier now to share information about whatever you're looking for, but specifically about this, we can easily come up with a great presentation about this is why we have to teach music in schools. This is why we need art at all levels. Those things are available to us in ways that, honestly, even 10 years ago, we couldn't find as easily and as quickly the same kinds of information as we can now.
All right, Nick. So if I just invented a time machine and I offered to take you back to the afternoon of your high school graduation, what would you tell yourself?
Oh my goodness. What would I tell myself? I've always been, I think, a pretty level-headed person. But I would definitely tell myself to stay focused on the important things. And I believe probably my priorities aren't a whole lot different now as they would have been when I was 18 or 19. I get the big picture. So yeah. Actually, the thing, if I could go back and do it all over again, going back to your previous question, it would be the work-life balance. In the beginning of my career, I spent a lot of time just working because I thought I was supposed to. And not that I wasn't working hard or I wasn't working, in an efficient way, but I just didn't take care of myself as well as I probably should have. And I imagine a lot of young teachers are in that same boat. So definitely I would say that, figure out this work-life balance thing sooner. And then the other part, sorry, when I was a young teacher, I spent so much time learning to be a better teacher that I didn't go out and actually hear live professional music as much as I wish I would have. And being in the Dallas area, I had opportunities to do that. We had the Dallas Symphony, we had the Dallas Wind Symphony, Fort Worth Symphony, and a lot of regional orchestras. And I didn't take the opportunity to go and hear those groups because I was really focused on what I was doing in the classroom. And so, yeah, if I could go back, I would say, be more focused on the important things, take care of yourself better, and then don't forget to go out and hear live music.
All right, Nick, if you had a choice, what would be the final work that you'd want to conduct or perform?
One of my favorite pieces in all genres is the Persichetti Symphony. And I think if for my final concert before I retire, if I'm fortunate enough to be able to plan all the things out that way, that piece will definitely be on that final concert. And the other piece that I love is the slow movement of the Barnes Symphony No. 3. Every time I hear that, I get goosebumps. So that piece might be on it. But yeah, for sure, I think the Persichetti Symphony would be on that on that program. The Persichetti's harmonic language to me, it's just always it draws me in. And there's so much beauty, I think, in the way that he writes melodically that unfortunately, I think sometimes people miss it. A lot of my colleagues, they hear, the harmonic language of Persichetti or like Schumann or any of those kind of mid 20th century composers. And just because of that language, it doesn't appeal to a lot of them. And so they miss out on what I think is the other aspect of their writing, which is the beauty and melodic line and the way some of that harmonic language that they aren't really attracted to, like, can pull you in. And then when it relaxes a little bit, it also allows you to just sort of be a little bit more harmonically calm as a listener. So yeah, that piece for sure would be on that final concert.
So it's a little bit of an odd question given the state of the world right now, but is there anything coming up that you would like to share or promote?
No, like so many ensembles around the world, we have some virtual ensemble videos that are about to be released on the university's website and also the Wind Ensemble's social media sites. So on Facebook and Instagram, we're at MCM Wind Ensembles. So we have some of those sorts of things that are coming out. But I think, like most of us right now, we're just ready to get back to being able to be together, to rehearse, to perform, just to be, back in this in the same room at the same time, to experience those things that we haven't had a chance to do live together in the same place at the same time, to do those things again.
So Nick, how can people get in touch with you?
Because I'm so far away from most of your listeners, the best way is probably through Facebook or email. So my email address is nicholas.williams@unimelb.edu.au, or if you Google my name and University of Melbourne Conservatorium of Music, you'll find me. Interesting, there are two Nicholas Williams professors at the University of Melbourne. There's me in the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music, and apparently a very well-known, super famous scientist, also Dr. Nicholas Williams, who I sometimes get his emails and sometimes he gets mine. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic and just the timing of when I got here, we haven't yet had a chance to meet. But so there's two Nicholas Williamses at this university.
Excellent. Nick, thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, this was great. This was a lot of fun. I hope that your listeners found some of this at least a little bit interesting. And it was great just to be able to sit back and talk about music and band and all the experiences that we have in common and the people that we know. And I'm just looking forward to, that time when we can all get back to doing what we do in the ways that work best for our situations.